welcome back to the Romo Unpopular Opinions. A full disclaimer before we get started. I already filmed this video, only to realize that something was wrong with my phone and there was no sound. So we're gonna do this again. I let a couple of days pass so that my enthusiasm that I lost can renew itself, because I said some very cool things, if I do say so myself, about some books that I'm not sure I'm gonna be able to replicate. So we're just gonna do our best and review this again, probably a little bit less enthusiastically than I did the first time, but you're still going to get my thoughts, and I'm going to do my best to make them the same, in essence. We are going as far back as May, because I'm just going to go through what I read in May and then do the 3-month wrap-up. So in May, I read The Phantom of the Opera, which I might have mentioned already in the mid-year freakout tag, but I read The Phantom of the Opera. I was obsessed with that soundtrack for 2 days straight, and then I just had to read the book. Then I read a short graphic novel about Wells, which was unremarkable in every regard, so I don't even want to mention it. Next up, I read, this is now June, and June was exam month, so it might be a bit of a mess, but next thing I read was King Lear. Now, I cannot read Shakespeare in English. It's one of the few things that I genuinely can't read in English. So I read the translation, and it wasn't a good one. Apparently there's a better one, but I didn't know about the better one. So it was a struggle to get through, but I really enjoyed the chaotic themes, and I think Shakespeare is very unusually funny. I remember liking Hamlet a lot when I read it in high school, so I enjoyed King Lear, but not as much as I would have if I could understand half of the things that were being said. Next, I DNF'd War and Peace, because why would I want to do that to myself? Just for reference, I'm someone who read, I think, pretty much all the big Russian classics in high school, because I went to a language school, and I think in terms of literature, our classes were pretty good at getting us to read these books. So Tolstoy was the only one we didn't read because he was way too long, and I can see why, because here's the thing. I DNF'd it 150 pages in, which is not even 10% of the book, and the translation has 2 books. So if I don't care about what's going on at 150 pages into a book, I won't care about the rest of it. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. I usually am generous up until about page 200. I wasn't even generous until page 200 because I realized I don't give a damn. I just don't give a single damn about what's going on here and who's doing what, and the politics and the court and the behavior. Didn't care for it at all. For reference, this was a great translation. This is one of the best translators hereabouts, and he is excellent. I loved his writing, but I think I DNF'd it right before that long chapter that's just the letter in French, with the footnotes taking up this amount on the page. I hated how pretentious Tolstoy felt with all the footnotes and with all the French. It was insufferable to read, and I'm not gonna do it. I'm just not going to do it. I have no problem not doing something because I don't feel peer pressure, so no thank you. I've read my Russian literature, and pretty much all of it that I read was better than this man, so I am not doing it. Next up in June, I read, or reread, a bit of Flying Witch, because I bought some of the volumes, so I just read that for some easy reading, pretty much sitting on the floor. But let's get to the actually interesting stuff in June. That's before I went on holiday while I still had exams. I read the Epic of Gilgamesh. Of all the classics, I read the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, again, we did do it in high school, but I think just a couple paragraphs or excerpts from the whole poem. So definitely not completely. I read the entire Epic of Gilgamesh, the unedited, the edited, the how they came about deciphering the names, how they combined their research. I read some of the culture notes and stuff that are in the end of the book. I actually read the entire Epic of Gilgamesh. Why, you might ask? Because my hyperfixation for the Fate series was at an all-time high. This is obviously not related to books, although we will get to that, but in May, I rewatched my favorite, Fate series, and I was obsessed with it for, 2 months straight, I constantly thought about it, and I needed something that had to do with it to be able to enjoy whatever I was consuming. So because I couldn't rewatch it immediately, it would take too much out of me. I picked up the Epic of Gilgamesh solely so I can understand all the references made in the strange fake short episode that came out in July. That was the only reason. And to be fair, there were quite a bit of references that I could appreciate now, having read the Epic of Gilgamesh. That was the only reason that I read this entire thing, because I was obsessed with Fate at that time. And again, just another disclaimer, I watched all of Fate last year, so this was a rewatch for me. It was just a huge hyperfixation where until like the end of July, I pretty much didn't really interact with anything because I kept thinking about Fate. So yes, I read the entire Epic of Gilgamesh because of anime. It's educational. I've just proven that it's educational. That rant out of the way, in June, I also finally started my Ursula reread. I read A Wizard of Earthsea. I have such a weird relationship with Ursula. I feel like if I hate her, I'm very angry with her. And if I love her, I feel like she's the best author to ever exist. We have a very unusual relationship, Ursula and I. I don't like her sci-fi. I've tried. I don't like her sci-fi. But this story and the way it's written and just the emphasis that she puts on some things, it's everything to me. It's perfection as far as I'm concerned. I cannot complain about a single thing in Wizard of Earthsea. I also read the short ones because I always read Earthsea like chronologically because I have the big bind up book. So I also read The Rule of Names and The Word of Unbinding, but genuinely that book is everything. Everything and more. I can't wait to finish the first trilogy because I remember loving it so much. And the thing about rereads and why I love them has just been proven again with Ursula, because I read Earthsea once for the first time. When you read something for the first time, you kind of like speed through it. You want to see what happens. You want to see the outcome. But when you reread, you can take in the details, like the foreshadowing, stuff you know is going to pay off later. It's just so much better, and I loved it so much more this time. In July, though, we're up to July. After exams, I was dead in the water. Like, I was just done. My brain wouldn't work. I feel like my head had hurt every day for a month and a half. So in July, I was going to take it easy. I was going down to the seaside for 2 weeks. I was going to just chill. I read Watchmen before I left and then watched the movie when I got down there. So that was the first thing I read in July. Then I finished Warriors of God by Sapkowski, which we're going to get into that in August, but this got bumped down a star from Tower of Fools. That's all I'm going to say because I'm going to talk more about it when we get to the third book. And then also while I was there, I read The Approaching Storm, which is like the Obi-Wan Kenobi duology, I guess. Both of them are by Alan Dean Foster. And there's also a bind-up of like Kenobi stories. This is one of them. I loved it, but it feels less canon than the other ones because it doesn't align with what they did later in the Clone Wars. Like, obviously, all of these books came out between the movies, so they couldn't know what was going to happen in the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars hadn't been invented yet, but Barriss here is Anakin's age, and her and Luminara are like on a mission, and Anakin and Obi-Wan come to help them out, and that's the book. There's one thing that I took away from this book, and that is Anakin can sing. Apparently, they had like a little thing where they had to present their talents to a traveling village. No, not village, a traveling people. And they all had like their talents. Anakin can sing. Obi-Wan is apparently a very good narrator. I think Luminara was good with the Force, and then Barriss was like good with the lightsaber. But Anakin can sing, and that's a piece of information that I really, really needed to know. Now, briefly, we're going to go back to Fate. We're going to go back to Fate because, as I said, I was obsessed with it until like the end of July. So while I was in the seaside, I hunted down the Zero translation of like the novels of Zero, and I read the entire thing. I was obsessed with it. Like, I walked to the beach holding my phone and reading it like in 40-degree weather. So safe to say I was pretty much obsessed with it. And I have two things to say about it. One, I spent like a day copying and pasting that entire website into a word processor just so I can edit it, format it, and add covers, and transporting those into EPUBs on my devices. So that was a lot of effort. I didn't have to do, but I did. And the second thing that I have to say is I did not need this context. I didn't, because Zero is my favorite bit of Fate because it's based on a book. And you can sometimes tell when stories are based on games or books because they lack detail and a certain nuance that they do if they're based on games. I did not need this context. I didn't. Because everything that hurts me in the show is even worse here, and everything that I love in the show is even worse here. so in terms of my emotional involvement with the Fate series, this didn't help. It hurt me to the point where I had to stop hyperfixating, which is a good thing. It is a good thing, but at the same time it hurt like a bitch, you know. So I'm happy I read it, but at least it stopped my obsession for the time being. So let's just be grateful about that. Also, a master writer, we have to say. Last thing that I read in July was Tokyo Ghoul. I said before that I read this pretty much every summer. I don't know why. As soon as the weather gets hot, I just get that need to read Tokyo Ghoul, which makes no sense, absolutely no sense. But this is the first time I read it properly in its entirety. Because first time I read it online, the second time I had just a couple volumes, and now I have like the entire series, all the extra novels, the translated novel, the extra like material about the drawings. I have everything, and I read all of it chronologically, like exactly when it's supposed to be read. So it was quite the experience. I feel like I love this more every time. I don't even need to talk about it anymore, but I read that in July because of course I did. And let's go into August. We're first going to wrap up Sapkowski because I don't want to talk about him anymore. I read Life Perpetual because like the paperback came out in July. And this trilogy was very classic Sapkowski. Like it gets worse as the books go along because you can really tell that he's always sticking to pretty much not giving a fuck about what he's writing about, because you can almost feel like he's laughing at you through the page anytime you consider caring about any of these people, because he's like, haven't you learned by now? You're not supposed to care about all this stuff. This is just supposed to be fun and silly. But when it stops being fun and silly, that's when you are like, but what was the point? What was the point? So, did not enjoy the last book. It was a slog to get through. And the highlights were arguably not highlights when you think about them a little bit. So this got 3 stars. It didn't get 2 because I've gotten to know him by now. I wasn't that angry or disappointed, just a little irritated. So like he's pretty consistent with how he writes. So again, I can't give him 2 stars because I expected this. But at the same time, there was always that like inkling of hope that he might not do the thing that I expect him to do. So he got 3 stars. The first book got 5 stars, the second got 2, and the third got 3. So make of that what you will. Next, I read Revenge of the Sith, because apparently it takes me years upon years to finish the trilogies of vlogs. So I read Revenge of the Sith. That vlog's going to be coming up, but it's a lot of work because it's a lot of clips. But that absolutely destroyed me because I read it right after I finished Clone Wars, and that's never a good idea. So let's not even dwell on that anymore. You're gonna see the video if you even care. And we're gonna wrap up August now. I'm gonna go out of order a little just so I can talk. I read Aristefania, which is like a graphic novel, French graphic novel with like 4 volumes. Really pretty art. That's primarily why I read it. A little bit like rushed. I feel like the expansiveness of the plot wasn't really suited to how short the story was. But I still quite enjoyed it. Like, I would give the overall series a 4 star. And I really liked the finale. Final 2. I read Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind. And I will just say that this was like a masterpiece. Probably one of my favorite stories of all time. Beautifully drawn. I got like the deluxe editions and everything. The hardcovers. I didn't know I'd like it because I always enjoyed the movie but found it a bit lackluster. This was a masterpiece. Just a masterpiece because I knew how high he could go, but I didn't know it was this high. So it was like a massive surprise in the good way. So I will shout it over the rooftops that like if you like Miyazaki and kind of like his main theme, this is unskippable. Like, this is a must. This is a must because this is pretty much like his life's work, like his magnum opus. I think that's the only manga that he ever did, and he did it himself, and just wow on every single level. The final thing we're going to be talking about is Villette by Charlotte Bronte. Now, I ranted quite a bit about this in the last version of this video, and I'm going to try and not to, so I'll just like summarize my thoughts. I gave this 2 stars. Jane Eyre is one of my favorite books of all time. I gave this 2 stars. Though it's not for the reasons that you might think, because I like looked through the reviews, and this is not a very well-liked book in terms of Charlotte's work, but I agree with some reasons. I don't agree with others. For example, everyone craps on Lucy. I loved Lucy. Lucy was the only bit of this book that I actually liked. I liked being in her head. I liked hearing what she had to say. Her commentary was hilarious at times. I love her. Obviously, Charlotte is very good at dialogue. She's very good at having essentially nothing happening but still keeping you engaged. Like, she's very good at writing. It's just that her intention in this book was very much off. It felt like she resented the fact that she was known for the person that wrote Jane Eyre, so she really, really wanted to make something different. At least that's what it felt like. This is apparently a bit more personal to her because it's similar to her experience in Belgium, I think, but it just came across as, I do not want to be known as the woman who's writing stories like Jane Eyre. It really, really, really felt like that. But here's the rundown. The first 300 pages were a slog because you can suss out the 2 love interests from a mile away and you don't like either of them. But when you finally get rid of the first love interest, that's when the second one jumps in. And all of a sudden, she's writing him to be very likable. Again, she's very good at it, so he is likable because she's writing him that way now. But nothing changed essentially with his character. It's just that she's writing him to be likable now. So it's a little bit of a jarring switch. And just when you think, okay, fine, I'm on board, this is actually pretty nice, the romantic like tension is there, like the dialogue is there, like you believe that these people can be together, and then she hits you with that ending. Then she hits you with that ending that I entirely resented, and it felt so condescending on Charlotte's behalf. Like, I hated that ending. I was going to give it 3 stars. Like 50 pages from the end, when it got actually good, I was going to give it 3 stars because I was like, the majority of this book was garbage and I wouldn't read it again, but like, she nailed the ending. I bumped it down to 2 as soon as I read like that last page. I couldn't. I just couldn't. So this is not my favorite Charlotte. It's definitely not. It was her last book, so I did not care for it. I am glad that I read it because I really, really enjoy her style. I need to emphasize how much I actually enjoy her writing. I haven't read Anne yet. I couldn't read Emily, but I love Charlotte's writing. Just, even when you're bored with her book, you can keep reading. I didn't want to put this down. I kept thinking about it, and it wasn't a chore to get through. It was a chore to think about it and to reflect on the fact that one of the love interests is essentially a predator, but let's not get into any of that anymore. If you want to discuss this, please do in the comments. I will happily discuss this book because I feel like I controversially dislike everyone and everything except Lucy. So I'm very open to discussing this book, but yeah, that's all I have to say on Villette. It just soured my memory of Charlotte for the moment. I need to redeem that with another book. So just not the greatest. Finally, lastly, however you want to say it, what I'm currently reading, like this is May through August, it's now September. I'm reading this book. This goddamn book. Because look at it. Look at the setting. Like, it's the Swiss Alps, like it's the mountains, it's the snow. I'm currently dying in the heat. I wanted something wintry, and I know that thrillers are compulsively readable. Not this one. I'm almost done, to be fair. I have like that much left. And I would point to this book if someone asked me if anyone can be a writer. Because according to this, I'd say that yes, anyone can be a writer. If you know all the cliches and can pull a little bit of research out of your ass, then yeah, everyone can be a writer. So let's hope I finish this. It should, again, short chapters make this compulsively readable, but that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. As someone who's practically been watching like crime mystery all her life and have read not many but thrillers before, have you just thought of every cliche in the book? Every single one? This is just insufferable. The Silent Patient was a masterpiece compared to this, and I didn't like The Silent Patient at all, if you remember that review. So we're going to finish that, and then obviously, oh my god, it's a little dirty. Let's actually clean it up. I have to finish Lord of the Rings because I'm like almost done with Two Towers. I just haven't touched this book since May because Tolkien's writing is beautiful and lyrical and slow, which is not something I was in the mood for when I was studying and miserable. Like, my brain just wasn't in the state to sit down and talk about trees and brooks and the wind for hours on end. Like, I just could not. But I'm finally coming back to the state of mind where I can do this. So we're hopefully going to finish Lord of the Rings. And I've finally cut down the entire stack next to my bed. So now this is all that I'm currently reading, and I'm so proud of that. Like, when I finish Lord of the Rings, I will officially have no books that I'm currently reading, except Illuminations. But that's like short stories. I don't count that. So I'm very proud of this, and I hope you are too. So what have you been reading for the last couple of months? Now that I'm coming out of like the season that I hate and studying, I'm definitely going to be way more enthusiastic about reading and vlogs and opinions and reviews. So what have you been reading? Have you been liking it? How's your year going? How are you enjoying summer? But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. I've rambled a bit less than last time, but still feel like it was sufficient. So I'll see you in the next video.